that not only didn't people want to be alone with Meghan Markle, it wasn't just the staff that in fact were terrified. Or were they? As ever, let me explain. Morning chums, nice to see you today, and thank you so much as ever for joining me on another episode of By Royal Appointment. It's always good, as I say on this show, to share bigger, longer versions of events so that you can find out exactly who said what to who, when and why. I think this is important in the context because when you see stories, headline grabbers, and you think, well, what is that about? What did really go on behind the scenes? And that's part and parcel of the problem. What we've seen with Meghan and Harry is they're totally, not averse to not telling the truth, as it were. They like to tell you their version of events. And this has been pointed out time and time again. But you see, when you have that position, and I believe this is what Meghan truly believes, is that, they're ex-royals. So it's almost a bit like Edward and Mrs. Simpson. They lived a life of luxury based on the connection that they had. Everybody in the world knew that they had no part of the monarchy. They never saw any people at the monarchy. And this was throughout the 40s, 50s and into the 60s. But they still lived the high life because people were excited to meet somebody who had been the king, albeit for a short period. Now, Harry, of course, is going nowhere near that. His line of succession is very, very dodgy, given the fact that His Royal Highness, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, wants to change all of that once he becomes king himself. And rightly so. People do not want to pay to have two extra royals doing nothing on the other side of the world. And I think that's become crystal clear, given the fact that Harry has failed to get his own security. But where it gets interesting, for instance, is the bigger picture of how Meghan Markle started out so well, faked her way in, pretended to be this nice, cheery, easygoing girl, but then turned into, many people might suggest, of course, a character out of The Devil Wears Prada, snapping her stiletto heels at everybody, barking orders at staff, sending emails at 5 a.m. and making life incredibly difficult. When you meet those people that have literally survived the Sussex Survivors Club, as it was called, it's very hard not to have sympathy for them because they were caught in a very difficult middle ground. You see, the problem that you had is Her Majesty the Queen wanted to make this work simply because she wanted to make Prince Harry very happy. He was very adamant, and she knew from an early age that he was going to become, as you say, a handful, difficult, always wanting his own way, and very aware that he was getting, shall we say, sloppy seconds, given the fact that it was Prince William who was going to get the lion's share of the glory. Harry could not bear the fact that every Sunday William did spend time with Queen Elizabeth, but this was for royal training. And I'm not saying, all the dark stuff, but of course it's what we're seeing now. We're seeing a reflection of her hard work put into fruition. He does look like a person waiting to be king. He is very ambassadorial. He knows exactly what to do in the right occasions. The same could not be said of Prince Harry. Even if you remember when they unveiled the statue of their late mother, Princess Diana, inside Kensington Gardens, a day that I was there for. It was embarrassing, really, because Harry was fidgeting, joking around, didn't necessarily want to, I could understand, be there given what he'd done, but also didn't know exactly how to, work the crowd and indeed remain respectful. Yes, he turned up, and that was a thing in itself. Of course, even at that point, Meghan Markle couldn't drag herself away to pay the respects to his late mother. And also, let's not forget, when he took her to see his late mother's grave, apparently she threw herself on the grave, asking for guidance. Maybe asking for guidance where the jewels were kept. Who knows? But Meghan is nothing but, some people might say, to be a very difficult and demanding former actress. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realise is the fact that Meghan likes to perpetuate the idea that she was incredibly close, very quick, very fast with the late monarch. This is total fallacy. Queen Elizabeth tried her best to make sure that Meghan felt welcome. And the media goes down the line of, lessons were learned about how she treated Diana. Queen Elizabeth treated Diana with the utmost respect, and they remained friends after the divorce of her son, His Majesty the King, and herself, as she had done with Sarah Ferguson, and Sarah would testify to this. Yes, the Duke of Edinburgh had no time for Sarah Ferguson, but we know he was a special case. The Queen would still entertain both Diana and Sarah Ferguson to tea as often as she possibly could. Many times Diana would cancel those engagements because she had better things to do, perhaps darting off on a yacht with an Arab, who knows, but that really was the story. Now, in the case of Meghan Markle, the Queen very quickly decided that Meghan, while pleasant, was, well, still an actress. And she kept pointing this out long before the wedding, that to Harry, are you sure that she wants to give all of this up? Because she said, Meghan's a very good actress. Anybody else would have picked up on the fact that the Queen was actually saying that she's not being authentic, not being true. And you will notice that Meghan uses these phrases all the time. Authentic self, being true to myself, trying to convince you and I that actually she's not a gold-digging woman who had no feminist sort of background at all until she married Rich. The moment she married Rich, everything changed. And if you look at her brand new Inner Circle now, she talks about being a woman of colour and, of course, the 43% Nigerian heritage. But in fact, all of her team are white. She could have easily changed that. And I guess that's part of the reason why Nigeria have now fallen foul of Meghan and Harry offering a return visit. Or perhaps they simply couldn't afford it. But the Queen would never ever be alone with Meghan. And there were two reasons for this. Obviously, she didn't want to be quoted or indeed put in a position where it became embarrassing. Not that the Queen couldn't handle any situation. She'd met everybody, world leaders, dictators, you name it, and she knew how to handle them. Famously, the Kennedy family pointed out that, well, during a light, polite conversation at Buckingham Palace, things turned a little bit political. And the Queen very simply put down her butter knife and said, I think we'll move on from this conversation. We don't want to fall out, do we? Suddenly the room went quiet and everybody went back to being jolly because she'd spoken. She was the Queen. Meghan Markle couldn't get to grips with this. She felt that the Queen was a sort of tough nut to be cracked, and eventually she would fall for the Markle charm. She has quoted as saying to staff members that the Queen totally adored her, and in fact, she wouldn't be surprised if she would surpass the favouritism box of Catherine, who was then the Duchess of Cambridge. The difference with Catherine and Meghan, as we all know, is miles apart. And Catherine is really one of these very diligent people who respects other people's feelings. Meghan would apparently want to see the Queen on the most trivial of matters about her wedding, basically thinking the Queen should drop everything, the red boxes, the meetings with the Prime Minister, because Meghan had an upsetting moment perhaps with the florist, or of course the cake. The Queen offered everything, literally everything, to make that wedding work. But as we saw, right at the 11th hour, she booted her own father out, demanded, basically, that Harry go and ask his father to part Walker down the aisle. None of this went past Her Majesty the Queen. But then she already knew the problems, literally, about how Meghan was forging relationships, good and bad, in the inner circle. And this was because, despite her best efforts, Catherine, then, as I say, the Duchess of Cambridge, had been snapped back so many times, as was her family. The only way forward, really, for Meghan was to really out herself. And apparently, according to a source, she did it very simply, without even realising it. It may surprise a lot of people about the British monarchy. And I don't mean this in an unkind way, but they're not the brightest of people. They are the brightest of people with people, if you like, but what I call chancers, operators, connivers, the sort of thing. They take people at face value because that's exactly what they're trained to do. So they meet people from all sorts and backgrounds and walks of life, and they don't come with a sort of, I'm not liking you because of X. Of course, once that's brought up, naturally that comes out. This was the problem when you think about it with somebody like Meghan Markle, because let's be blunt, this had been years since, of course, Wallis Simpson. But Wallis Simpson was nothing like Meghan Markle. Wallis Simpson, if you look into her history and her background, was simply opportunistic, wanted to get on a little bit in life, liked the high life, liked the money, certainly didn't want the fame, and wasn't necessarily that too fussed about the former king. I mean, that's the truth of it. I think she would have been happy to carry on simply being his mistress because it suited her purpose. She had access to all the best things, and considering, he was buying her jewels left, right and centre, all the things that somebody like Wallace would like. Meghan Markle's a lot more conniving, in my opinion. As I said, at the very sort of early period of her career, I met her and she was very engaging in that very short sort of promo situation that she did for UK TV when they were promoting Suits over here. She was with a sort of like Argyle type jumper on. She looked very fresh faced. She is beautiful, or was beautiful at that point, whatever people might suggest. But she was very clever at the manipulation of, obviously she'd done some research before I sat down with her. Normally what happens, to give you the background, chums, is you go into this sort of, one-to-one with somebody. They'll say, this is Neil, he's from Fox, or this is Neil, he's from SWT or whatever, and then he does this show, it's a weekly thing, blah, 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 and then they build up this stuff. Nowadays, of course, you can very quickly look online and work out the person. How old are they? What do they do? What do they look like? So straight away, when I walked in, oh, I love your show, which was fascinating because it wasn't my show, it was part of a rolling news channel. So straight away I knew that this was a person who was going to be a bit of a charlatan. But you go along with it because it's the fakery of television. Meghan, when we sat there, she chatted away about what she loved about being in London, and people were so friendly and she didn't realise the show was so well loved. But she was very much positioning herself to be the bigger cheese of the show. Never once mentioning any of her co-stars, that it was an ensemble piece. You get the picture. She'd been sent over, and as far as she was concerned, she was promoting one thing. And that is, of course, the brand that was and still remains Meghan Markle. Not Meghan Sussex, Meghan Windsor, the Duchess of Sussex, just Meghan Markle. And what was fascinating at the end of this, she kept using my name and it was good to see me, and where did I recommend to go out, and is there any vinyl record shops? And it was, literally, as the kids say today, love bombing you with the sort of thing that when you went away, next time you got the opportunity, should she come back to London and you wanted to interview her, you'd think good things. This is exactly what happened inside the monarchy. You see, Meghan had this great idea that the way forward in the monarchy was to make sure that the top person, the biggest cheese in the pile, and that's a northern expression, by the way, but big sort of person, was none other than Queen Elizabeth. And the idea really was to get as close and ingratiate herself as much as possible. But, as I've said at the start of the video, but people like Queen Elizabeth had met everybody. She had the best advisors, people looking out for her, making sure, so consequently she was very, very attuned to the sort of person that Meghan was. But Meghan had decided that the way forward was in fact to try and befriend her dresser, Angela Kelly, a formidable woman and an expert woman, in fact, in characterisation. A Scouser, came from Merseyside, knew all about people. That's the thing that I liked about Angela Kelly. There was no getting past her. And I liked that because she knew what her job was, what the charge was. But very quickly, when she realised at this point that Angela was going to be the gatekeeper to blocking Markle's entrance into the inner sanctum, see, Meghan had this idea that if she could become like the besties with the Queen, knock off Catherine, who was then the Duchess of Cambridge, as the number one cheese, and just simply wipe out Sophie, well then the Queen would come to her. And this was the idea that she got in her mind, that if suddenly her and the Queen could have tete-a-tetes over tea and corgis, things were going to move in the right direction. This, I was told, and as ever I have to say allegedly, was the plot that had been spun to Harry. I will elevate you, remember that phrase? Elevate you to your rightful place. Forget Prince William, forget Catherine, we are the number one choice. We are the brand new kids on the block, and people will want to know more about us. You see how this works. But then, when that failed, Meghan turned her attention to a bigger cheese, in fact. And that was, and I don't mean that rudely about the Queen, but a more current cheese, should I say, and that was the Duchess of Cambridge. You see, Catherine is very private, doesn't necessarily open up as much as people may think. She's very gregarious, fun character, I have to say, but naturally in her position, and rightly so, on her guard. Meghan had a plan. When Meghan couldn't get her own way by getting into the inner circle of the Queen, she decided to send out her attack dog, which of course was Prince Harry. And what happened was that Harry went to the Queen and basically said Meghan's not feeling loved, wanted, she's tried to make friends, etc. The Queen, sensing this, very shrewdly, one might suggest, said, oh, well, don't worry, it will take time to accommodate and move in, give it some time. But this wasn't Harry's way. You see, as we saw when he went back to America, famously, and said he was just going to make sure that the Queen had the right people around her, well, that really was the idea, to try and get, the Queen to sort of go, oh, don't worry, we'll sort it out for you, all that sort of stuff. But she wasn't having it because she knew and had heard from other members, staff teams, people that had really caught the blunt of, Meghan's, shall we say, difficulty, to be nice. Well, then, this had been fed back. So the Queen was very quickly losing being enamoured with Meghan Markle, unlike, of course, our king now, King Charles. You see, Charles still thought that, Meghan was wonderful because she's very good at charming men. Right. And she had charmed Charles beyond belief, faking up interest in architecture, climate change, all of the things that really he's very turned on by, Oh, I studied that, I like that, And this was heard by former staff members who have now come out and I can say spoken to me at length on this stuff. I find her quite fascinating, Meghan, because it's nothing new. I've seen this time and time again. Literally time and time again. I remember talking to the great son of the wonderful band leader, Nelson Riddle, and he told me how Judy Garland was very, very charming at finding out exactly the latest tunes that Nelson was recording, writing for others. And by extracting them very slowly, suddenly, once hearing Judy's rendition, it was very hard for them to give it away to somebody else. You see, manipulation works in marvellous ways. Meghan suddenly thought, well, where else can I turn? Now, the problem that she had was the fact that obviously she was keeping herself secret and hidden away as she sort of announced the arrival of her first child, Archie. Despite what people said and despite what Meghan claiming that, she tottered around in high heels and had gained 65 pounds, etc., etc., well, actually, not many people saw Meghan during that particular period. Yes, she popped up on those royal events, clutching the bump, and a lot of people thought this was rather odd. But of course, I wouldn't actually say anything around that because I don't know whether that's something that ladies like to do or not like to do. I'm sure we have an opinion out there. But what the Queen decided was that actually Meghan needed to be, shall we say, slowly introduced into the monarchy, which is what she did. But then once Meghan couldn't really break through, that's when, according to the source, suddenly things started to take a turn for the worst. Meghan felt suddenly very depressed, and those are the stories that we heard popping out of Oprah Winfrey's interview. Never once did any senior members of that royal team, including the Queen, hear anything about Meghan being suicidal. Now, given Harry's sort of, shall we say, parchment for rushing out and telling his problems to the world, don't you think he would have sat down with somebody like William or indeed gone to the Queen and said, I really don't know what to do. Meghan feels very unsettled and unhappy. What do you suggest? No conversations of that level. So where did this come from? If you remember, Meghan's version of events is she woke up one night crying and Harry heard her and suddenly she had to confess all. Now, I'm not decrying that people can become upset and depressed, whatever, but surely in that very privileged position, you'd want to share it. But by this point, sadly, everybody had got very fed up very quickly with the demanding Miss Markle. The real icing on the cake as to why most senior members truly dislike Meghan Markle is all down to one particular event. And if she, of course, truly cared about Her Majesty the Queen, this turned off many senior staff loyal members for good. And there is no way back from this because these are the situations in life that sadly can never be retrieved. But Meghan pushed ahead and pushed ahead hard. And then this happened. The way Meghan operated was very clever indeed, but a lot of girls out there will have met people like Meghan's, and you know what I mean, ladies. And the idea was that suddenly, she didn't necessarily, according to a well-placed source, like Catherine's style, hair, makeup, clothes, whatever. She thought it was very stuck in the 90s, Meghan saw herself as more free-spirited, better dressed, and could catch the allure of those definitive sort of front pages, the things that she was really looking for, which were the Vanity Fairs, the Vogues, the Elle's, the Glosses, And, Meghan could not understand why Catherine was feted so much. Plain Jane is apparently what she was dubbed behind the scenes in that inner circle. And you have to remember, it was like a witch's coven as well, because they were all together on this. That was Meghan's inner circle of friends. But get this, on the day of the royal wedding, all of them were desperate to get a picture with Catherine. And very cleverly, she sidestepped them all. You see, the thing was, the likes of Abigail Spencer, they're just desperado actresses who, and I mean this in the kindest way, will stand next to anybody if it will get them profile. If you look at the likes of, the guy that she made take down the pictures, Adams, remember him? I've forgotten his name now, but, the co-star, Patrick J. Adams. Well, he too was circling the Duchess of Cambridge because he thought getting a picture next to a real royal rather than a wannabe actress, well, this is going to work. But of course, that was sidestepped. But Meghan decided to push a little bit harder. And the way forward that she worked out was to find out exactly what made Catherine tick. And the best person to do that, and many people know this if you're a lady, is through the hairdresser. You see, the hairdresser and the makeup are the two most interesting pieces if you work in television or film. You see, I've been in makeup rooms at 5:30 a.m. in the morning in a studio, and they are the most fascinating places because it's where all the stories are told. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And the makeup artists, by turn, know exactly what you're asking them. They're very clever, very shrewd. A makeup artist, for instance, will never say you've got bad skin. They'll say, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Which basically means do something about your skin. I'm sick of trying to plaster this over first thing in the morning. And I've got lots of friends who are great makeup artists and hairstylists. I know you wouldn't believe it, but you know what I mean. And this is where it gets interesting. Because Meghan decided the way forward was to, see if she could get booked in with Catherine's hairstylist, the brilliant hairdresser to the stars, Richard Ward, who of course has done hair for so many different people and did Catherine's hair on her wedding day. I just thought she looked terrific, actually. But Richard's a very, very clever man, but also very savvy. As I said, I've worked with many celebrity hairdressers, including Daniel Galvin, the former hairdresser to the late and beautiful Princess Diana. And I think the thing is, it's the thing of sitting in the chair and the relaxing. And if they ask you a question and you ask them and they ask you, and if it's, I was doing X's hair, what are they like? So suddenly the conversation goes. Happens in everyday hair in barbers, doesn't it? I think men were a little bit more disinterested. I always want to fall asleep. You're with me, fellas? Not bothered. It's the sound of the cutting. You think, I can't be bothered, But the thing is, this was where Meghan felt she could get all of the secrets about Catherine. The likes, the dislikes, the foods, what she drinks, what she eats, how often does she come in, what was the condition of her hair, that type of thing. Well, Meghan tried and tried and tried. And sadly, this wasn't happening. So Meghan then cast her eye over to the makeup team that were looking after Catherine. But you see, Catherine did her own makeup, particularly for events at that point. She'd done it very well. She'd learnt it from her mum. And so she didn't really want all of that effort every day. It's a totally different thing now on formal events. She will have a professional makeup artist. And I think, again, she looks terrific with it. Meghan wants to take claim for that because she says, all thanks to her move into the monarchy, well, this is what exactly changed Catherine's look to make her the superstar that we know and love today. You get the picture. Moving forward then, when that absolutely failed, Meghan wasn't about to give in. She thought about, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh, but he'd been sidelined off to Sandringham. And so she wondered if she could go and visit him to learn all about, of course, her husband-to-be. That was soon knocked on the head. You see a pattern forming here, right, chums? Meghan was desperate to get in at any level and work out the plot, because she knew William had no time for her. And she also knew that Catherine, well, was not exactly unfriendly, but was very cautious. And I would say she was cautious for a reason. Of course, her very clever mother, Carol Middleton, will have warned her all about Meghan. But Meghan wasn't about to give up on that. When Meghan couldn't get her own way by getting into the inner circle of the Queen, she decided to send out her attack dog, which of course was Prince Harry. And what happened was that Harry went to the Queen and basically said Meghan's not feeling loved, wanted, she's tried to make friends, etc. The Queen, sensing this, very shrewdly, one might suggest, said, oh, well, don't worry, it will take time to accommodate and move in, give it some time. But this wasn't Harry's way. You see, as we saw when he went back to America, famously, and said he was just going to make sure that the Queen had the right people around her, well, that really was the idea, to try and get, the Queen to sort of go, oh, don't worry, we'll sort it out for you, all that sort of stuff. But she wasn't having it because she knew and had heard from other members, staff teams, people that had really caught the blunt of, Meghan's, shall we say, difficulty, to be nice. Well, then, this had been fed back. So the Queen was very quickly losing being enamoured with Meghan Markle, unlike, of course, our king now, King Charles. You see, Charles still thought that, Meghan was wonderful because she's very good at charming men. Right. And she had charmed Charles beyond belief, faking up interest in architecture, climate change, all of the things that really he's very turned on by, Oh, I studied that, I like that, And this was heard by former staff members who have now come out and I can say spoken to me at length on this stuff. I find her quite fascinating, Meghan, because it's nothing new. I've seen this time and time again, literally time and time again. I remember talking to the great son of the wonderful band leader, Nelson Riddle, and he told me how Judy Garland was very, very charming at finding out exactly the latest tunes that Nelson was recording, writing for others. And by extracting them very slowly, suddenly, once hearing Judy's rendition, it was very hard for them to give it away to somebody else. You see, manipulation works in marvellous ways. Meghan suddenly thought, well, where else can I turn? Now, the problem that she had was the fact that obviously she was keeping herself secret and hidden away as she sort of announced the arrival of her first child, Archie. Despite what people said and despite what Meghan claiming that, she tottered around in high heels and had gained 65 pounds, etc., etc., well, actually, not many people saw Meghan during that particular period. Yes, she popped up on those royal events, clutching the bump, and a lot of people thought this was rather odd. But of course, I wouldn't actually say anything around that because I don't know whether that's something that ladies like to do or not like to do. I'm sure we have an opinion out there. But what the Queen decided was that actually Meghan needed to be, shall we say, slowly introduced into the monarchy, which is what she did. But then once Meghan couldn't really break through, that's when, according to the source, suddenly things started to take a turn for the worst. Meghan felt suddenly very depressed, and those are the stories that we heard popping out of Oprah Winfrey's interview. Never once did any senior members of that royal team, including the Queen, hear anything about Meghan being suicidal. Now, given Harry's sort of, shall we say, parchment for rushing out and telling his problems to the world, don't you think he would have sat down with somebody like William or indeed gone to the Queen and said, I really don't know what to do. Meghan feels very unsettled and unhappy. What do you suggest? No conversations of that level. So where did this come from? If you remember, Meghan's version of events is she woke up one night crying and Harry heard her and suddenly she had to confess all. Now, I'm not decrying that people can become upset and depressed, whatever, but surely in that very privileged position, you'd want to share it. But by this point, sadly, everybody had got very fed up very quickly with the demanding Miss Markle. The real icing on the cake as to why most senior members truly dislike Meghan Markle is all down to one particular event. And if she, of course, truly cared about Her Majesty the Queen, this turned off many senior staff loyal members for good. And there is no way back from this because these are the situations in life that sadly can never be retrieved. But Meghan pushed ahead and pushed ahead hard. And then this happened. Behind the scenes to people, and as ever we have to say allegedly, Meghan Markle has told many famous people like Ellen DeGeneres and the likes of Drew Barrymore that her most enduring friendship within the royal family was that with the late monarch. Right, you get it. Now, here's where this gets really interesting, because the real reason Meghan, you can understand, wanted that was because obviously the Queen was of a certain age, and in the fullness of time, the fact that the Queen had confided in Meghan would have given her oodles of information, storytelling, that sort of stuff. But because the Queen kept her at arm's length, well, that was the problem. Now, on that terrible situation, and it was very upsetting, and I think everybody totally agrees with me on this, I was very moved by it, when you learned about just how ill the Queen was. And we all knew literally inside the inner circle, as we do with everything, if I'm honest. The problem was that you have to be respectful, and that's what I wanted to do. I don't believe in sort of airing people's medical issues. I think there's certain things that we should ask as journalists and reporters, but to define them, I think, is totally wrong. That is a private issue for the individual. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a king, queen, royalty, aristocrat, whatever, it's up to you. That's your personal thing. A little bit like, of course, the Queen, who famously said that, Lilibet was the name that she owned, right? But Meghan trampled all over that, and that was the level of interest and, of course, respect that she decided to give our late and beautiful monarch, Queen Elizabeth, who I absolutely adored. Now, when, of course, the news came that the Queen was falling ill, we all know the story about Meghan and Harry kicking off and, the delayed flight, etc. But the bigger story that I was told from an absolutely spot-on source was this. You see, Meghan was desperate to get in to see the Queen. And, like as we know, what happens is senior members of the family go in to pay their final respects. It's a very moving, and it happens in every family. It's very emotional, highly charged, and you know that probably this is going to be the last time that you see these people on earth, at least. Now, Harry very much detailed all of this in his book, Spare. But his version of events, like so many things in the book, are, well, shall we say, to coin a brilliant phrase by a brilliant woman, recollections may vary. You see, Harry was pushing and pushing hard to get to have his wife by his side to see the Queen. And this accelerated more so when Meghan realised that actually Catherine had now decided to stay back in Windsor. What better than to have Catherine out of the way, and she, being the only wife, yes, let inside to pay her final respects to one of the most brilliant women of course, her generation. Not Catherine, Meghan, right? And this was the reason, according to the source, and you know which one that is, because Meghan famously fell out with them. And the bottom line was that she wanted in there because this was going to be her gravy train, the story that she and Harry had those final moments away. She could not believe, and neither could Harry, when they were told point blank that this wouldn't be happening. Phone calls went back and forth, and as ever, I have to say allegedly, with Harry virtually begging, pleading, and almost threatening to pull out himself. A remiss, stupid idea, one would suspect. But where this got really interesting, as I say, was, you see, it accelerated when Windsor was the place where Catherine now was. And as you know, it would have taken even more time to get Catherine up there. William very much sensed this, and it was William's final decision. Sadly, not His Majesty the King. He was too emotional. It's his mother. We get it, right? We've all gone through it. And so it was left to William to say, this is your opportunity, take it or leave it. But there are no wives. My wife's not coming. Neither is yours. Meghan was left absolutely steaming because she saw that opportunity of capitalisation going through her fingers. And if you think that's a harsh thing to say, this is a woman who's just capitalised full stop, right? I mean, that's your problem. She's just capitalised at every single opportunity. And so consequently now, when she talks to people behind the scenes of, like, as I say, the Ellen DeGeneres show, Drew Barrymore, all of those people that she's now interviewed with, and they ask about the royals, Meghan is very keen to pump out the story that actually the only person that she really related to, and they bonded and got on incredibly well, was none other than the late monarch. The truth is, she barely knew the Queen. There was that very public engagement, and of course the Queen famously, decided that where she was going to step off and step on with Meghan. But of course, with Meghan, that's, well, not the true story. You see, only she knows just how close the Queen and her were. And this apparently is going to be saved for Meghan's best tell-all book. You see how this operates now. Fast forward though to this year, and this gets interesting. When you look at the sort of big tell-all interview that Meghan and Harry did with Oprah Winfrey, and of course the numerous other things like The Cut, which were incredibly hurtful to the late monarch. Let's not forget, just how cruel and, well, I don't know if you can put it into words really, chums, do you? Let's not forget also the Duke of Edinburgh was in the final throes of life. Not exactly an easy time for the monarch. And you know what was fascinating? As I say, I've covered many situations with Queen Elizabeth. And I remember once being at the BBC when she came for a visit. And he was in hospital at that point, and she was very, very dismissive of the fact that he was in hospital. She said, oh, he'll be fine, don't worry, I'm not worried, he's fine. It was a woman who just saw that this man would continue to be by her side. That was true love. She just needed him, and he needed her. They were a match made in heaven. Despite all the stories that you may read, it was just a wonderful union, in my belief. But you see, Meghan, according to a source, well, the thing was, when she decided to do the interview with Oprah Winfrey, let's not forget, this was trailed a lot before it came to air. People forget the extensive marketing campaign. Meghan, in fact, was looking forward to being on the big pillars in Times Square. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this was a big opportunity, magazine covers, that sort of stuff she thought would come in. However, it was decided that with Netflix's sort of blessing, that really, less is more and that should go forward. Meghan, of course, has now spun this story, and as ever, we have to say allegedly, that should anybody with inside the monarchy have reached out and said, this isn't the right time, is there any way you could delay it? And particularly, of course, if the Queen had come forward and said, look, Meghan, I thought we were friends, the sort of thing I'm saying, well, then it would have stopped. And that's Meghan's answer as to why it went ahead. According to the source, she couldn't stop it because, of course, she was just Meghan giving an interview, a former cable TV actress on a bit part soap who'd married into the world's wealthiest and, some suggest, most famous family. What could she do? She'd married for love. This was her prince. She didn't have that power. And so obviously, and if you remember, when Netflix claimed that they'd put a call into the press office, well, nobody ever responded. Well, it's a little odd, isn't it? Because the press office get a lot of calls, but Harry would have known exactly the pivotal people to contact if that was the case. But now Meghan is backtracking this story so that she doesn't look like this terrible victim who's done something terrible to somebody who was in the terrible moments, if you like, for want of a better word, of life. Queen, of course, Elizabeth, was going through an awful time. Just dreadful. And to have to sit there and watch everything that she'd put together over 70 years dismantled and say, well, the royal family were racist or they weren't welcoming and they took away my car keys and my passport. It made it like you were joining some kind of cult, not a warm, loving family who bent over backwards to make you very welcome. But of course, Meghan, now sensing the fact that even when she did the fake curtsy on the following documentary, well, no, that wasn't her either. It was just a fun thing that, she didn't know how it got left in. She would have liked it to be taken out. Everything's rewritten to suit Meghan's, plot, her new narrative. But you see, the true story about Meghan Markle and senior members of the British monarchy is literally this. After her trying to push to get in front of the dying Queen Elizabeth, and let's not forget, I have the utmost respect, given the fact that she met her very final Prime Minister. And remember, it took a lot to galvanise herself, to put on the makeup, the clothes, everything, just to swear that new Prime Minister in. Whatever people think about Queen Elizabeth, that was dedication. That was true service to life. Meghan didn't care about that. No, she went ahead, made sure, of course, that her voice was heard, because finally she had a place at the table. And given the fact that this woman had been so kind to her, and even Prince Charles walking her down the aisle, and all the other people, Meghan apparently was the victim, the one that was treated so badly. It's only now, as things are falling apart and her business empire is going nowhere, but once again she's looking for somebody to blame. And the person she's looking at is literally right next to her. Because of course Harry, well, he could do everything. All she needed was Harry. And what happens with people like Meghan Markle is the ones closest to them finally get the bullet. We've seen that with all of her friends. And so we saw that with her first husband, Trevor. Why does Harry think he's any different? It's a ticking clock. Anybody else agree? Thank you as ever for joining me on, of course, our latest appointment by Royal Appointment. And if you can, chums, please like and share. And until next time, where we'll look a little bit deeper into some of our favourite royal stories, please take care of yourselves and whatever you do, keep smiling. Neil Sean, Kensington, London.